In June of last year, I raised the concept of the transabled on this program. It was an extrapolation on the transgender movement, which we're told is totally normal. And I wondered why those able-bodied people who identified as disabled weren't treated the same. People like one-hand Jason, who cut off his own hand with a power saw to achieve his ideal self-image. Or the lady who poured bleach into her eyes as part of her blind affirming care. Now, of course, I never thought we should treat these people as having anything other than a mental condition, but I did question how long before we move from transgender to transabled in the public debate. Well, I'm ashamed to say that time is here with the brains trust that Channel 10's The Project asking themselves, what should we do?
On the surface, you're like, how can that even be? And to try and find a doctor to take off a perfectly healthy limb, because, you know, doctors do no harm, but if it's a neurological condition that is going to go a long way to help them.
But it's hard to ask a surgeon to solve a neurological condition by, like, you know, it's just...
And would he get a prosthetic hand? Would he want a prosthetic hand to replace at the end?
Correct.
Do this crew have no self-awareness? None of the panellists could identify that their own confusion about cutting off a healthy limb for transableism is any different to cutting off healthy breasts or genitals for transgenderism. Well, joining me now to discuss this is psychiatrist Tanveer Ahmed. Tanveer, thank you for your time. You will recall this conversation we had a couple of years ago. As a psychiatrist, is the notion of alternative self-identity a product of the mind?
Oh, look, absolutely. It's certainly one's own experience. There's still contested whether it's purely neurological or it's more environmental. I mean, you even use the term transableism. So even that language, Cory, is the language of disability advocacy. And it's not actually the language of mental illness, whereas a psychiatrist would call this body integrity dysphoria. And it's had various names over the years, but that's its most recent sort of name used for it. So even in the language, yeah, it's kind of even trying to make it normalised. You know, go, hey, we just need to advocate these people. It's a type of ableism.
Yeah, but this is the point that I want to make. I mean, how is wanting to have your leg amputated or, you know, wanting to be blind when you've got perfect vision any different to wanting your breasts removed, for example, or to have your genitalia altered?
Well, there's huge overlaps, aren't there, with trans... And in fact, even in this group, there are a higher rate of people who identify as transgender. So there's clearly an overlap. And you're right, it's all about authenticity movement, that my subjective experience is somehow an automatic reality and the society at large must contend with that and essentially confirm it in some form. But look, it is a little bit more nuanced though, Cory. So what they were raising on the project, there are actual studies that, because there's so few people who suffer from this, there is a study, it's only with 12 people, but in that study, when they did amputate a set of people, it was found that when they followed them up, at least in the short term, many of them did have a level of suffering removed. There are all sorts of other problems, and that's too small a study to draw any sort of conclusions. So it seems ridiculous, but the question is more if it's outright mental illness, it just raises all these ethical, difficult questions. And there's no way a surgeon would do something like this. Like, it'd be struck off, like it'd be outrageous. And you're exactly right. Yet, when it comes to transgenderism, it's seen as like a perfectly logical, legitimate thing to do, when it should be equally as controversial and contested and at times outright ridiculous to consider this.
Yeah, and this is the challenge. Right now, there is a move, I think, to look at alternative care for body integrity dysphoria. I'm going to use your clinical term for alternative care models centred around counselling, psychiatric care, rather than first steps to surgery. What you say about no legitimate surgeon would do this to someone, chop their hand off because that's how they identify themselves. How soon should we be embracing this alternative model for transgender care that is sweeping the world now, which is about the counselling and psychiatric care and letting adults make decisions for themselves later on?
Well, look, we should absolutely. I mean, that's many of us have been advocating that, all along. And arguably, there's more and more information coming out as more and more this is happening. I think that the more information we're getting over time, and we're seeing people over a longer period, I think it is becoming clearer that this is a very dangerous step. So there's no question that it should be treated as a type of mental illness to some extent, helping people adjust and treating all these other types of things that are contributing it. It's really a form of identity disturbance, as the psychiatric language says, yet that's not being allowed in the transgender side, where we have to be far more accepting and almost legitimise it. So you're exactly right to make the connection, and the connection is more profound than you probably have seen in the research, because when you actually research the numbers of this, there's a huge overlap, people who identify as transgender and people who suffer from this type of disorder.
Yeah, this is a huge challenge, and society needs to deal with it, particularly when it comes to children. Adults will do all sorts of crazy things to themselves. They, adapt their bodies, but I don't think we should be pursuing this path or legitimising for young people at all. Tanveer,
so Cory, let me just finish.
A very significant role to play in this, of course. Yeah, please do.
Just a final comment. So really, the potential of this, and you're right to highlight this, is that any type of identity disturbance, right? Any type of identity disturbance is ultimately a subjective experience, and then if we channel that through the lens of identity politics, then we're just embracing, essentially mental illness and trying to go to all lengths to try and legitimise what is a pathological experience. Like, it's crazy.
It is crazy, and the world's been sucked into this vortex of craziness. I'm trying to shake us out of it, and I'm pleased you're here to offer your expertise. Thanks very much for joining me, Tanveer Ahmed.